Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the On Meaningful Work podcast. This is your host, Rahul Sones. And today we have an incredibly special episode. We've got Simon Griffiths, who is the CEO and co-founder of Who Gives a Crap, the Aussie B Corp that sells good-looking, forest-friendly toilet paper, paper towels, and tissues direct to you guys, the consumer. Now, Who Gives a Crap donates 50% of their profits to help build toilets for those in need. As much as Simon loves toilet paper, he helped start the business for its impact, with the company on a mission to improve access to hygiene, clean water, and basic sanitation in developing countries. Since founding the company back in 2013, Who Gives a Crap has donated more than $10 million, which is incredible. Now, we cover a lot in this episode, from Simon's childhood in Perth, his first jobs, his motivations for getting into the social sector and social entrepreneurship, and how the legendary Who Gives a Crap came to be. It's an amazing journey, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you for listening. Hey, Simon. Welcome to the On Meaningful Work podcast.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this, man. And before I jump in, I've got to ask. We just went through this massive pandemic, 2020. The world went crazy. Toilet paper went crazy. So, being the head of a toilet paper company, how's that for you?
It was totally wild. I think, two things happened. Toilet paper, as you said, as you put it, went crazy, but also supply chains then went crazy after that. So it's been a real roller coaster for us. But yeah, that first kind of 3 months of the pandemic was pretty wild. I think we built up a wait list of 500,000 people, a bit more than 500,000 people. And that's a really hard business problem to solve as an inventory business, because you know that you'll never have enough stock to be able to email 500,000 people saying, hey, come and buy from us, because you'll be sold out as soon as that email goes out. And so, yeah, we ended up, I think, sort of coming back to our purpose in that period. We talk about our purpose being this North Star that keeps us sailing straight when the sailing's good, but it's also this anchor that grounds us and holds us steady when the sailing gets rough. And in that period, I think the sailing got pretty rough for everyone around the world, but for us, it also got rough at work. And so, the team, I think, knew that if they could figure out how to get toilet paper to the most people possible, because we donate half of our profits, it would result in this amazing donation come end of financial year. And so everyone worked really hard trying to figure out how to break the back of that problem, and did an amazing job. And I think we broke, probably every email marketing metric that's ever been set as a record. I think we had something like a 70 or 80% open rate on our emails. Like it was mind-bogglingly high. And the cherry on top of everyone's hard work coming up to the end of that period was being able to make a $5.85 million donation at the end of the financial year. And so that was, just a really nice pat on the back for everyone that had been involved. And it was one of those amazing moments where everyone really truly understood how the work that they were doing today was going to help us achieve that donation at the end of the financial year. So the connection to our purpose was just incredibly strong, which was an amazing thing.
That's incredible. I can just, if this was a movie, I can just picture the montage, if all you guys go crazy, Possibly,
I think there's pictures of our customers who'd ordered too much product, who were making thrones out of toilet paper that went viral. We saw it in 7 different languages all around the world. So yeah, it was a real moment in time.
And did you do a bit of diagnosis as to why that happened? Like, why did toilet paper? Why toilet paper?
Yeah, it's a really interesting phenomenon. So the easiest way to explain it is that it's mostly rational behavior, which is what people get shocked by, because it seemed like it was completely irrational by the end. But what actually happens is there's 2 markets for toilet paper. There's the at-home market, which is the soft, fluffy 3-ply stuff that we sell and that you probably have in your bathroom. And there's the away from home market, which is that horrible 1-ply kind of waxy, terrible stuff. And those 2 markets they're kind of roughly the same size. But when the pandemic hit, people weren't going to the bathroom any more often, but the bathroom they were going to shifted to being 100% at home. And there wasn't enough product in the market to support that shift. And so when you think about what happens, people are like, oh, I'm going to be at home, we're almost out of toilet paper, I need to go to the shops. And then if too many people do that, toilet paper is one of the first items that sells out in supermarkets because you can't actually fit that much of it on the shelf compared to, shampoo or food, which takes up much, much less room. And so as a result, you can fit less of it in the store and you have less of it in your warehouse. And so it's one of the first items that sells out when you get a surge in demand in the supermarkets. And then, the rational behavior is that if you see an empty toilet paper shelf and this commoditized item that's always been readily available is now no longer available, the rational behavior is to buy whatever pack you see when you see it. And so that's when it starts to spin into this irrational kind of, version of the world, which is what I think everyone remembers through that period. But it comes from a really rational place of, we're going to be at home more. We need to go to the shops and buy more product. That product's one of the first that runs out. And that's when it starts to drive this irrational behavior that got amplified with social media as people were posting photographs of empty shelves.
Yeah, I think not just photographs, but just people, fighting over toilet paper, and it was really chaos for a mad minute there.
Yeah, it was wild, and it was interesting seeing. We have suburb level data, so we could see where it was taking off, and where the panic was kind of happening in a way that probably no one else could. And so it was really interesting, kind of from a behavioral economics perspective, seeing how that all kind of unfolded was, we were kind of gobsmacked watching it all happen.
Yeah. Yeah. What an incredible place to be in at that time for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of joked at the time that we were a direct consumer business that had a remote team, and so it was almost like we'd been training for that moment for the 6 or 7 years prior, and it was our time to shine. Like we had this moment where we could show the world what we could really do. So it was really interesting. I think obviously there was a lot of really bad things going on in the world that led to that point. So it's hard to kind of look at that time with kind of favorable lens, but and obviously it was a really hard time for our beneficiaries. The big picture view that we had was, guys, like there's 2 billion people that don't have access to a toilet, let alone being concerned about running out of toilet paper. Like come on, like there's kind of a bit of a zoom out moment here that I think everyone needed to have. But at the same time, it brought a lot of our customers closer to their community because they had these huge, 48-roll boxes that we were sending them that meant that they had enough product to give to their neighbors and make sure everyone around them was doing okay. So, it was, I think it led to some nice outcomes as well as some, some not so nice moments that happened along the way.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So maybe, rewinding quite a bit now. So, just to start with your, origin story, where are you from? Where are you born?
So I was born in London, in West London, in a place called Acton, in the early 1980s. And my understanding, I haven't actually asked my parents too much about it, but my understanding was that that was not London's prime time. It was kind of one of London's less prime time moments. The 80s in London, I think, weren't super great in terms of, the long history of what it's been like to live in that city. Obviously, relative to other parts of the world that had, wars and stuff going on at that moment in time, it was still pretty good. But my dad sort of said, you know what, like, I think there's kind of a better quality of life that we can maybe get if we are able to immigrate and spend some time in Australia. And so he was a consultant. He built up enough work in Western Australia. And so we moved over when I was 4 years old. Mum and dad, I think mum convinced dad to go for 2 years and then we'd go back. And then at the end of that 2 years, they said, let's go back for a holiday because we're going to come back for another 2 years after that. And another 2 years, and it's now indefinitely extended to, another 2 years.
And that was in Perth?
That was in Perth, yeah. So mum and dad are still over there. I grew up there, left home just after I turned 17, and went back to the UK and actually got to know my family, which felt like a missing link for me, having not spent that much time with them. So I spent a year over there, which was a really formative year for me, and then moved to Melbourne, where I studied at the University of Melbourne, and
Awesome.
now based in Victoria, but outside of the city, in the what I think is regional, but technically is still part of metropolitan Melbourne on the Mornington Peninsula.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, that's a great spot to be in.
Yeah, it's been great. Yeah.
And were you in Mornington during the pandemic?
Yeah, we were, which became one of those kind of hotspots that a lot of people were kind of moving to. We've been down here since 2015, so our kind of long-term view when we bought our house down here, we were really stretched financially, kind of buying a house. It wasn't easy. Houses are cheaper down here, or they were. I don't know where they're at now. But our long-term view was that this house had more value to us than anyone else because we were both self-employed. We were able to work remotely. We truly believed that, as the future of work kind of unfolded, as self-driving vehicles kind of came into the market, that property prices in the areas that are 1 hour out of Melbourne would dramatically increase. And so we felt like we could sort of stretch financially to buy a house outside of the city that would sort of come back and pay for itself in about 15 years' time. And that 15-year thesis, paid off 5 years later when COVID hit, and all of a sudden remote work, became the norm.
Yeah, wow. That's I think this is your maybe your economics training coming into play.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think slightly differently to most people, maybe. Yeah.
So moving back to Perth for a second. So you did your schooling in Perth, obviously.
Yeah. So yeah.
What were you like in school? Like, did you like school? Did you do well?
I was always a bit of a like, I think, reflecting on this recently, I probably realized that most of my life I've actually felt like a bit of an outsider. Like, I'm a bit different to most people. And that sort of played out a bit in school. Not that I didn't have friends, but I just never, I had lots of different friendship groups, and was sort of friends with a variety of different people, whether that was, the nerds or the cool kids. I could kind of play both of those games, those camps, somewhat. And so, yeah, school was great. I went to public schools, learnt a lot. I was that kid at school that kind of sold stuff to people. And
really?
So my entrepreneurial streak was pretty strong from a young age.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was good.
What do you, looking back at that time, what do you, I suppose, attribute that entrepreneurial streak to? Were your parents entrepreneurs, or?
They're both self-employed. I don't know if they would call themselves entrepreneurs. They both kind of ran their own sort of businesses. Dad as a management consultant, mum as a psychoanalyst, and then they sort of had small kind of side businesses on the side with almost like a kind of co-working style office space with kind of shared offices in a house that they bought and kind of rented. So yeah, I don't know if they would call themselves entrepreneurs. I don't know. I think there was, I've always been someone that was fascinated by brands and money and capitalism, but also something about it never felt quite right until I kind of ended up finding this blend between capitalism and maybe socialism. I don't know what you'd want to call it. And
Doing good in the world.
Yeah, doing good in the world. Maybe that's not socialism, but yeah, so I think that was kind of there from a young age, and I loved, I worked lots of part-time jobs as a kid. I always had a lot of money because I worked really hard from a young age, kind of outside of school, and that taught me a lot about kind of the value of money and transactions, and I was, really fascinated by brands and the dopamine you got when you buy something and open a box, which I said that to someone the other day and they said, I don't get that. But for me, when I open something, like I get a like rush from it. And so a lot of the work that I do now is actually about like, how do you take those very powerful moments where you deliver that dopamine, but instead of it being from buying an iPhone or something, it's coming from buying goods that you actually need, like toilet paper or shampoo or a sponge. Like, how can you kind of deliver those moments and have that extra kind of value from the product come through in everyday products rather than things that are luxury purchases that happen infrequently with goods that we arguably don't really need. Like, do we need the new iPhone, or was the Nokia actually pretty good and bulletproof and could still be running today?
I had a Nokia for about 10 years. I think that thing never died. It was
yeah. I still think about whether it would be better to go back to the Nokia, but there was a period where I tried it and I used to have to call up my dad to ask him to look at Google Maps for me to find out where I was. So there were some impracticalities that came from having it as well.
That's true. I couldn't live without Google Maps. I'd be forever lost. But maybe thinking back to your little entrepreneurial streak as a kid, what were you doing entrepreneurially? Did you have a lemonade stand, or were you?
I would have tried a lemonade stand at one point. I can't remember like specifically how that one played out. One of the more lucrative enterprises was selling sandboards. In Western Australia, there's no snow, but there's lots of sand dunes. And so we grew up, right next to a really big sand dune actually. And so we would make these, boards out of laminated plywood that we'd glue and bend and then put a laminate kind of surface on the bottom of it, and you'd wax it, and then it would fly down the sand dune kind of like a snowboard. And I figured out that, essentially going direct to consumer, I was able to undercut all of the boards that were sold in retail outlets with something that was, just as good quality. And so I sold boards to numerous, friends and made, quite a bit of money doing that, which was a bit of fun. So that was kind of one venture that sort of took off. I think I tried reselling Coke at school for, slim margins on a low value purchase that wasn't.
This is Coca-Cola, yeah.
Yeah. Good call out. It was Coca-Cola. But yeah, there was all sorts of stuff in there. So it was, that was like a great way to understand more about how people place value on items. And I think one of the interesting things that I found from it was that, particularly selling sandboards, I actually got left with this feeling of guilt after every sale where I was like, I can't believe they paid that much money for it. I don't know if it's, truly worth that much. What if it, comes apart? And so there was a lot of kind of anxiety that came from that transaction. And so one of the big breakthrough moments for me, later on in life was actually realizing that if I could start to feel better about, business and transacting with someone if I started to push social outcomes into the transactions themselves. And so that's kind of obviously what, Who Gives a Crap's all about, but really what I spent a lot of my time after university kind of thinking about.
So maybe at that time, say thinking back, what would you, I suppose, attribute your social conscience to? Why did you feel this need to incorporate that into, or this guilt that you felt for, just taking people's money without doing something good?
I think the social conscience, probably wasn't there as a kid. It was probably the seed got planted, and that sort of came from us traveling back to the UK every second year to see family, to, renew the next 2 years in Australia with my mum and dad's agreement. And doing that in the, late 80s and early 90s, there weren't that many kind of flight, it wasn't like today where if you're going to London, you fly through Doha or, somewhere in UAE or Singapore. They're kind of the three, or Thailand or Malaysia. They're kind of the main hubs that you would transit through today. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, we flew through Malaysia, through Zimbabwe, through Egypt, through Japan, and every time we'd spend a little bit of time in each of these places, wearing off the jet lag, having a bit of a family holiday, and experiencing a little bit of what it was like to spend time in that sort of an environment. And that was actually really formative for me as a kid, because I started to learn a lot about other cultures and also kind of realize how fortunate I was to have been born where I was born, and that later on in life realizing that if I'd been born somewhere else, I would not have had the same set of opportunities available to me. And so I think I became really interested later on with getting into a more kind of granular version of that. When you spend time in Southeast Asia and you cross from one side of a border to another, you can often see the change in the socioeconomic kind of situation that happens when you cross this invisible line. So I started to become really interested with why, like how come you've got this invisible line that runs through the land, and living 100 meters on either side of that can start to vastly change the set of opportunities that you're able to engage in. And so that that's now something that I know is called social mobility, but back then was sort of just an intrigue, and I started to get really interested with this building this understanding that actually there are a lot of people, billions of people, that would never be able to do what I was able to do, and to follow their passion, and to find what it was that they wanted to bring into the world, and that was actually a luxury and a privilege that most people didn't have. And because of that, I believe there's this massive amount of untapped potential that exists in the billions of people that don't have that luxury or privilege. And if we're able to help those billions of people get to a place where they can start to do that, I think we've got this huge amount of kind of latent inventors and scientists and artists and musicians and people that can bring amazing things into the world that today just don't have that opportunity. And so pretty much everything I do is about how do you start to tap into the latent kind of potential of the billions of people that aren't able to access those same opportunities as perhaps you and I are today.
No, that really resonates in the sense that I was brought up in Mumbai, and in Mumbai, talk about social mobility. Sometimes it's just a literal line, a literal street that separates the haves and the have-nots.
And same in South Africa. Same in lots of places around the world. You can really see that. It's a literal physical line.
And also, so maybe thinking back to your life as a kid, we talked about where some of the motivations came from, but is there an event or experience that you think about or you're drawn, or maybe that really presages what you do today?
No, it's kind of, it was like this 20-year journey of, starting with those trips as a 7-year-old to Egypt, and just, being like, kind of having my mind blown by the fact that there was this other version of the world that existed that was just so entirely different to what I knew. So it started kind of then, and it wasn't until my mid-20s that I started to really be able to kind of tease it all out. It's the exact opposite of the Who Gives a Crap story, which is, Who Gives a Crap's the product of that 20-year kind of, process of kind of thinking and reflecting and taking it all in. And then one day walking into the bathroom and seeing a 6-pack of toilet paper and having a quarter-second business idea epiphany of, sell toilet paper, build toilets, call it Who Gives a Crap. Yeah. Knowing that the sanitation problem is, the most off track of all of the development goals, and that, it's a huge proportion of the population that's affected by it. So it's kind of, it's almost interesting that I had to have this like 20-year kind of journey to get to this quarter-second epiphany that happened walking into the bathroom one day.
That's funny you should mention that, because I think it was Stephen King, and he was describing his writing process, and he says, he sits at his desk for 5 hours a day, but nothing comes to him. But then in the last 30 to 40 minutes, 1,000 words just flows through. But he said like he needed that 5 hours to get to that 40 minutes.
Yeah, that'd drive me crazy and I couldn't do it. But it sounds like sort of similar.
Yeah. But yours is 20
But,
years. Yeah.
that 5 hours I'd need to be like in the garden or like just not sitting in front of a computer doing nothing. Yeah.
So maybe traveling back again to Perth, and like when it came time for you to go to university, how did you think about what you wanted to do, and what did you end up doing?
So I always knew when I was a kid that I wanted to leave Perth. I think that's a common thing that a lot of Perth kids have. They can't wait to kind of to be finished at school and to be able to get out or finish at university and go to the big smoke on the other side of the country. So for me, that was I knew that from like I was counting down the years from 12 until I was able to legally leave home. And so I left literally as soon as I could. I think I turned 17, November 1st of year 12, and then left on Boxing Day because my parents begged me to stay until Christmas. And so, so that was a relatively easy decision to make. I can't remember what your question was though, beyond Perth.
Oh, it was around when it came to uni. How did you decide
What to
wanted
do?
study? Yeah.
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to be outside of Perth, and I should say, I've been back to Perth. I really like Perth,
Yeah.
but I think a lot of kids can find it a challenging place to grow up because you are so far away from everything, and it's easy to feel like you need to have more, which maybe isn't the best feeling, but that's something else we can unpack later. And I think what I realized when I took my year off, it was 2000. I was living in a house with a stockbroker who lost a ton of money in the tech crash.
Oh, wow.
I somehow have this very, throughout my life, I've always been very lucky to kind of find these moments where I land on my feet. And that sort of happened in the UK when I ran out of money. I traveled around Europe and kind of did all that stuff that's sort of, the rite of passage. And then came back to London. I think I had $80 in the bank and I was like, all right, I've either got to find a job this week or I need to change my plane ticket and fly home, at the end of the week. And that was back when, for some reason, you could change plane ticket dates without, any fees and any, change in fare difference and all that stuff.
Good old days.
And so, somehow I got a job at a real estate firm, and at lunchtime, I was just doing odd jobs, but at lunchtime I'd jump on to a kind of chat room called IRC, and the real estate firm's boss saw me kind of using this chat room, and he's like, hey, you know a lot about the internet. Do you want to build us our website? I was like, sure, if you buy me the software, I'll build you a website. And so through that job, I learned how to kind of, do enough coding to kind of build websites, and then realized that in 2000, this was a very lucrative kind of thing to be able to do. And so I built websites for, a lot of small businesses around London that built up enough money for me to start paying my way through university once I got back a year later. And so in that year, I realized that I really liked coding. And so I applied to do electrical engineering, which I was told was software engineering, but kind of a bit broader, and computer science side by side. And eventually, didn't get into that in Melbourne because I don't think I had the right maths subjects, but got into, science and engineering, or arts and engineering. And then I was able to transfer after 6 months into computer science and engineering somehow, which I remember was a bit of an ordeal. But after taking a year off and learning that I could code, and kind of if I applied myself, I could kind of do, learn a lot of things that I never thought I'd be able to, built a lot of confidence. And so when I got to university, I realized that actually if I concentrated while I was studying, I could get good marks. And so after the first 6 months, I kind of pretty much got kind of straight A's essentially, and then was able to kind of transfer into whatever I wanted, which was a good outcome. Yeah.
Can I just jump back to the real estate office and the boss asking you to build a website, and you just jumped in. I think the question is around fear and what's your relationship with fear? Because I think a lot of people would just go, "No, I don't know how to code," you know.
Yeah, I didn't have it. I didn't have fear as a kid. It was just like a missing emotion for me. I think I didn't have a lot of emotions as a kid, or a lot of kind of emotional intelligence. So I was missing fear. I was missing, probably a lot of empathy as well. So I couldn't read a room particularly well, and in many ways, they were great assets to have as a young person. I got myself into a lot of bad situations too, but I think to kind of lay out how that decision happened, I knew how to use Photoshop, so I could kind of make stuff look good, and then I just need to figure out how to turn those pixels into something that existed on the internet. And I figured that part couldn't be that hard. And I had friends that had, used similar software. And so I said, can you buy me this software that my friends use? I'll ask them a bunch of questions, find a bunch of online tutorials, and I'll figure it out. Like, it can't be that hard if my friends can do it.
Sure.
And so that's kind of the philosophy that we have, at work now, that nothing is too hard. You just have to figure out who are the right people to help you get up the learning curve as quickly as you can, and then figure the rest out yourself. And that's, it's a great fun part of running a business, being in a high growth startup. It's not for everyone, but
Sure.
But it's something that I personally really enjoy. And honestly, being a founder, a CEO of a high growth startup it's the one job where you just have to learn so much as quickly as you possibly can all the time. And that's an amazing privilege to be able to be in that position.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, I think, it also, I think, holds a lot of people back. It's they see a problem and think it's too hard, and then that's the end of it. Whereas, like you said, if it's a problem for you, chances are it's a problem for someone else, and chances are that person solved that problem. So,
yeah,
you to seek that
and
out.
I think, like if you're switched on and you can apply yourself, what I learned that year is if you're switched on and you can apply yourself, you can do anything. You just, you could be a great marketer, you could be a great copywriter, you can do any of those things, but you just have to really focus on figuring out how to do them. And it takes time. You got to learn, spend time doing it and getting it right. Of course, there'll be some things that you're naturally better at, but I think that when you're young, you're pretty placid, and you can learn a bunch of different stuff and go in a lot of different directions. I think it gets a lot harder to do that as you get older, as you start to have focused in particular areas that make you strong at some things. And I think when you get a bit older, you also have less tolerance for doing the things that you find frustrating. Whereas when you're a kid, you kind of, grin and bear it a bit more and are happy to kind of grind through it. That was my experience anyway.
Sure. And then after uni, what did you think about a career? Like, how did you go about thinking about a career, or what job to get?
Yeah, so I had a lot of the risk-taking nature beaten out of me at university. That was maybe when, fear started to become more of a thing that was in my life. And, I ended up, I sort of talked about this a little bit before, I ended up getting quite good grades at university. And when you get good grades I ended up also transferring out of computer science and into economics and finance. When you get good grades in engineering or commerce, you kind of get told that you need to go and be an engineer or a management consultant or an investment banker or an accountant. I knew I didn't want to be an accountant. The other three, I was like, I don't know enough about these to know whether or not I'd enjoy them. And so I kind of took this approach of kind of test and learn, and got summer internships at an engineering firm. I got a summer internship in an investment bank, and went and spent 3 months in those roles, soaking it all in, seeing who the people were that were kind of, that was what they were kind of, shooting for in terms of their aspirations and what they wanted to do.
It's
and
like the Bill
honestly, yeah, honestly, like I had a bit of an allergic reaction. I was like, this is not for me. Like I don't fit in this mold, and I feel uncomfortable. I'm also not, I don't feel like I can give it my all. I don't have the motivation to grind it out and, really kind of give it my best shot in this environment, which felt like to me it was not a good use of my time. I'd rather be somewhere where I was all in and just super excited to work on whatever problem I had to solve. And I just didn't get that in this environment where I was essentially just, making money for shareholders. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that was kind of a big realization that if I didn't like engineering, I didn't like investment banking, I probably wasn't going to like management consulting either. Mm-hmm. And so I had to figure out what it was that I was actually really passionate about. And, mm-hmm. That was kind of the end of that 20-year journey where I started to, or the beginning of the end where I started to reflect on what it was that I'd done in my life that I truly enjoyed and why, and whether there was something in there that I could actually turn into a career versus it just being an interest or a passion area. And that was this realization around, social mobility and this draw that I'd had to the developing world after spending a lot of my holidays there, through university. Initially because it was cheaper for me to live in, Southeast Asia or somewhere else than it was to go back to Western Australia, which is, where everything costs a lot more. But, eventually realizing that actually it was more than just this kind of selfish pursuit that was drawing me there. There was something kind of academic about it that I found fascinating as well.
Mm-hmm. So throughout your travels, at the time, throughout your travels in Southeast Asia and the Third World, where did you notice the gaps in traditional philanthropy, and where was that not being, I suppose, not being helpful to the local population, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of gaps in traditional philanthropy. I think one of those trips, I made a point of trying to see what organizations were doing what work on the ground to try and understand what good development looks like versus not so good development, and what was the lay of the land, how did these organizations operate. And what I found was that there were a lot of organizations that were doing good work. When you asked them what was holding them back, the most common answer was a lack of funding. And they were spending about 30% of their time trying to gain funding from different grants or other funding opportunities, not realizing that 9 times out of 10 they wouldn't be successful, and that time spent was a huge kind of organizational drain. And so what I realized is that they were competing against the same pool of funds that came from the philanthropy market that exists from people's donations. And if you're trying to increase the size of that market, try and get more philanthropy dollars flowing into that pool, the only way you could do that was by getting people to give more money than what they were today. So if you're trying to double the size of the philanthropy market, you have to get everyone in the market today to double their donations forever, or find the same number of people who aren't donating to start donating and give the same amount. And those two things are impossible. You can't change that behavior in that way. And so what I realized is that the philanthropy market is doing a pretty good job. We don't need to grow the size of the philanthropy market if we can tap into the trillions of dollars that are changing hands in the economy and start taking a slice of the profits out of the goods and services that are being sold in the economy and funnel those into the same organizations that are generating social impact that are currently just reliant on the philanthropy market. And so it was sort of this kind of light bulb moment of, why do we just rely on this which in Australia is about $10 billion, when there's trillions of dollars over here that are changing hands in the economy? We should be thinking about how we can tap into that instead. Yeah.
Was that also a light bulb moment, or was that a gradual process that you came to that realization?
That was a light bulb moment where it was like, I can't remember. Probably wasn't walking into a bathroom when that one happened, so I can't remember where or when I was when that happened. But it was kind of just like, this seems insane. There's a whole lot of the world dedicated to our economy, which is a huge kind of beast, and a very small number of people dedicated to the philanthropy market. Like, why? How do we start to shift that focus a little bit and have everyone involved in philanthropy through their purchases, rather than just once they make enough money that they've got some disposable income that they can donate at the end of the financial year. So yeah, it probably was a little bit gradual, but it was one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like, it seems completely insane that we do it the way that we do today.
And then how do you go about, I suppose, implementing that, or starting a company and so on?
I think we had a few different cracks at this kind of same problem. So how do you get more people to engage in philanthropic activity? The first was a website called Ripple that we founded back in 2007 with 3 other founders. The idea was that it was kind of like a charitable search engine. So you'd run a search, and the revenue from that the ads from that search would get directed to a charity that you choose. You could also watch an ad, and the revenue from that ad would get directed to a charity that you chose. So the idea there was that we thought more people wanted to engage in philanthropic kind of activities, but they didn't have the capital or the resources to do it themselves. What we actually found when we launched it was it appealed to people who were already engaged in philanthropic kind of activities. And so it didn't change the behavior of everyone else. It just made philanthropy more accessible to people that were already interested in it. And so that was a bit of a flop, and we mothballed that one. The next business was a non-profit bar and band room called Shebeen, where we sold different beers and wines from all over the developing world, and 100% of our profits went back to organizations in each drink's country of origin. That was a beautiful business that ran for about 3.5 years, had a lot of positive impact on a lot of people, but was always going to be limited in its scalability because it's a bricks and mortar business. It's very hard to get someone from Broome in Western Australia into Shebeen in Melbourne to have an impact with their everyday purchases. And maybe they're from a religion that actually prohibits them from drinking in the first place. And so,
can I just say, like, for me personally, Shebeen has a lot of emotional resonance because it's where I suppose first got inspired by social entrepreneurship, thanks to you, but it's also where we first kind of set off this whole disruptive business network journey. Like, that's where we first held our events, and also went to a lot of amazing gigs there. So that was a really special place for me personally.
Yeah, thank you. It was for me too. I think the unfortunate kind of closure of it happened when we discovered that our very loud band room had a wall that we thought backed onto dirt in the basement, but backed onto the sleeping quarters of the police station around the corner from us. And they made life very difficult for us, essentially played dirty. I'm not going to go into the story, but eventually, we had to kind of, the only responsible thing was to wrap up the business, which was a total shame because we didn't achieve what we set out to do. Especially in that last year, we lost a lot of money. I lost a lot of money personally because the restrictions the police put on the business made it very hard for us to be profitable. As a result, the other big learning that came out of it was that hospitality is a very hard industry to make this profit donation model work in because it's hugely variable. And if you look at really good hospitality operators, they have a portfolio of businesses, some of which are hyper profitable, some of which are loss making. If your first business is a loss-making business, you can't build that portfolio. And so you sort of have to get lucky with the first one being hyper profitable to then be able to build a portfolio that has some kind of risk pooling across the assets in the portfolio. And so, the next idea, wanting to escape the limitations of bricks and mortar to be able to service anyone, anywhere in a business category that was hyper stable was to start a toilet paper company, and that's kind of how we've ended up where we are today.
Awesome. So Can I just ask, so with Who Gives a Crap, I suppose, how did you think about the brand? Because, say, prior to Who Gives a Crap, my understanding of toilet paper or a toilet paper brand was puppies and feathers and softness rather than poo, really. Like it's nowhere in toilet paper history has anyone mentioned poo ever. I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, we still, I guess crap we do have in our brand name, but we say that our brand name is the dirtiest thing that we'll ever say. So everything else has to be more above the line and kind of okay. It can still be funny, but it shouldn't be dirty. Is kind of how we think about it. So yeah, the Who Gives a Crap brand, I think, as I said before, it was kind of this quarter-second business idea epiphany, the brand name, the product, and the cause. And when I literally called 3 friends as soon as I had the idea for it, and they all said, I love it, you've got to do it, it's an amazing idea. I can't believe no one's done it before. And that last piece, I can't believe no one's done it before. If someone says that to you, or several people say that to you with a business idea, you're onto something really special, because you've hit on something that seems so elegant and so simple that it should already be in the world. This person is saying, my version of the world, this should already exist because it's so perfect that it should be here now. And that usually means that you've got something that people want to tell other people about, which tells you you've got the potential for viral growth, which is exactly what happened in our first 2 years. We just grew completely from word of mouth, tripling year on year without doing any marketing or advertising ourselves.
This is a leading question because I know the answer, but how did you initially get the word out?
So we, good leading question. We started with a crowdfunding campaign, and that was important because I think at the time I had less than $1,000 to my name, and a few hundred friends on Facebook who probably wouldn't buy Who Gives a Crap if I was trying to sell it to them. And so we had to find, we also need to prove not just that we could get the money that we need to get started, which is why a crowdfunding campaign is a great way to get started. We need to find our first 1,000 customers. And probably more importantly, we knew we had to put tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of eyeballs on what we're doing for people to see it and tell us whether this was a good idea or a silly idea. And so we ran a crowdfunding campaign. Someone working on the campaign called Lock Hall, who has gone on to sort of make a career out of creating viral moments, most recently with his own brand called Vacation Sunscreen in the US, which had an incredible kind of viral launch campaign. He was working on the crowdfunding campaign and said, there's something missing from this. And then a few days later came back and said, I've got it. You need to shoot the campaign with you sitting on a toilet, and you should pledge to not get off that toilet until you hit the $50,000 pre-sales target. And it was this beautiful moment where it was one of those ideas that, again, was just like, this is perfect. Like, I can't say no to this. It's going to be horrible, but it's, it's so simple and elegant in its execution that we need to make it happen. And so, we launched, on Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. In the middle of July, in the middle of winter in Australia, and weren't quite sure what was going to happen. Luckily, the share button had been added to Facebook, only recently, kind of before then. And so it just kind of took off as a viral campaign. We ended up national television, national print in Australia, print in the US, did 2.5 million social media impressions. And after, I think we were embedded onto the homepage of the largest Latin American newspaper, with our webcam of me sitting on a toilet was kind of on the homepage of this newspaper when you went to El Globo or whoever it was. So we were crazy popular in Brazil and Greece, which we still haven't figured out exactly why, those two markets. But after 50 of the most horrible, never ever to be repeated hours of my life, we hit that pre-sales target of $50,000 and we were in business, which was an amazing outcome.
That's incredible. It's an incredible story. And also, like, the video itself is a work of genius. And, what I didn't know about you was that you were born in England. And now thinking back on that video, it has a very British humorous
there's something
tinge to it. Almost more
there is something, there's something about our brain brand that's definitely kind of, somewhere between Britain and Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then that video, I think that really got the company rolling. And I suppose besides being a brand and a physical product, like Who Gives a Crap in a way is also a logistics company.
Yep.
So like initially, how did you set that up?
Honestly, it was really hard back in 2012 in Australia. E-commerce was like garbage. You couldn't, we had to set up a network of couriers. We had about 9 couriers that we meshed together across the country to give us national distribution. We knew that we could ship to most of the eastern seaboard without too many problems. Western Australia was a bit of a nightmare for us. So luckily, I grew up there. My parents still lived there, so I could send pallets of toilet paper on the train. My dad had recently semi-retired, and so train, because it's about 10 times more efficient than a boat, which is about 10 times more efficient than a truck from a carbon perspective. So love trains from a kind of supply chain environmental kind of angle. And then, Dad would receive these pallets of toilet paper and put them into our family van and drop them off to people around Perth to be our kind of satellite warehouse. And that was how we got started. And then eventually, we opened up our second warehouse in Perth, our third warehouse in Brisbane, then somewhere, Sydney, Hobart, Adelaide, Canberra kind of all happened shortly after that. And having that mesh of, that network of warehouses is actually really critical from an environmental perspective, because ship miles are 8 to 10 times more efficient than truck miles. So we're able to ship product into Australia from overseas into our different ports and then deliver to our customer from there. And from a carbon perspective, that's roughly the same transport footprint as it would be to manufacture in a single location in Australia and truck product all around the country. We knew we had to get to kind of 6 warehouses roughly to be able to get that carbon equation to work.
Sure. Just shifting gears a little bit. When you first started, did the term social entrepreneur exist?
I think it probably did. I remember someone saying it in kind of 2007, 2008. The term direct consumer definitely didn't. That happened, 2014, 2015, I think. The world was a really different place. The internet was a very different place as well. Yeah, Mega Upload, they were still around.
Like looking back now, what do you think people get most wrong about social entrepreneurship or setting up a social entrepreneurship company?
I think what we did that's been really successful is we took all of the traditional tools that are available to for-profit businesses, and then we twisted them by putting the non-profit kind of 50% donation model into the same kind of shell. And that's been incredible because we can sell equity, we can do all this stuff that's kind of, there's a very well honed kind of playbook that comes with building businesses that are for profit, because you can throw money at them and, try to make them happen really fast. We didn't do that. We bootstrapped our business, but it meant that we had all of the same tools available to us through that journey that allowed us to, see who was the best in the world and figure out what they were doing and apply that to our business, and then try different stuff to find new ways to push the boundaries. And so I think that's what's made us really, it's kind of our special sauce in a way, is that we took that toolkit and we made it better by having a social element kind of built into the business. And so everything was built for scale. We knew that if we're trying to solve the sanitation problem, you have to be a business that's doing $10+ billion of revenue a year. We're certainly not doing that now. We're not going to get there next year, but that's where we want to be in 30 years' time. And to do that, you have to kind of use the traditional kind of tools that are available, I think. And so from very early on, we knew that scale was important, and as a result, we had to really kind of focus on building that scale from day zero. Yeah.
But I also think that, who gives a crap at the end of the day, outside of the social impact that you have, is an amazing product, just by itself. In that it's like when I get it, it's not so much a box of toilet paper; it's almost like a box of candy. It really evokes a sense of joy and everything you do with your brand.
Thank you. I mean, we're redoing our wrapper designs at the moment, which I think are even more kind of candy-licious. So
Excellent.
I'm looking forward to hearing what you think when that happens in March or April next year. But yeah, I think when we started out, we said we've got to sell it for the same price or less, the same quality or better, and we can't use guilt to motivate sales. They were kind of the three rules. I think we've probably evolved a little bit since then. I think occasionally guilt is actually okay. You don't want to do it every day of the week, but there are moments where guilt can be appropriate. And I think the other big thing's been a focus on quality. So, we already talked about quality. Sorry. The other big thing has been, maybe that's it. But I think what we did was a lot of the innovation was actually around the customer experience rather than the physical product itself. So, we said we don't need a 5-ply or an 8-ply toilet paper, but we can innovate with packaging, with delivery, with impact, with customer experience when something goes wrong, with our communications, with our email receipts. These are all kind of places where no one has innovated before. And if you put that all together, you create something that feels materially different to when you go and purchase at the shops. And so that's been a big part of our success. And I think, the business could have been successful if you took away the social impact. It wouldn't be as successful. It's a key part of, what keeps people coming back and really falling in love with the brand. But we wanted to build something that could stand up without the impact piece being there, and then layer the impact piece in as just the cream on top, essentially, of what's hopefully an amazing customer experience.
Sure. Can we briefly touch on the impact? You've been going for about 8 or 9 years now?
Yeah, we've been trading consistently for a bit over 9 years. Yeah.
And in that time, what has the impact been in terms of your social mission?
Yeah, so total donations are a bit up over about 11 million Australian dollars now, which we're really proud of. That $5.85 million donation we were able to make in 2020 is obviously a big chunk of that. It's about half of it, which is just an incredible year. That we were having a great year coming into February, and then what happened from March to June, no one could have predicted. So I think we were on track to make our first multi-million-dollar donation that year, and then it just kind of got bigger and bigger. So yeah, I think we're incredibly proud of where we're at. Reaching $1 million for the first time was amazing because there's, $1 million is a big number. That said, we are trying to make sure that 2 billion people who don't have access to a toilet today will have it at some point in the future. And $10 million doesn't go very far when you're trying to solve a problem that affects 2 billion people. So we do know that we've got a long way to go to kind of reach that goal. And as I talked about before, it means getting revenue up into the tens of billions of dollars, which means donations up into the hundreds of millions or billions. And that's going to take a while to get there, but super exciting problem to attack and see if we can solve.
And also, so I think it was last year that you did do a significant raise. How open were investors to this model, and do you sense a shift in capitalism? The way capitalism is conducted.
I think how open were investors? I think we probably saw that investors were more open to it in certain geographies. So I think this kind of idea of purpose-driven brands resonates more in Australia and in the UK and Europe than it does in America. That's not to say there aren't people that it resonates really strongly with in America, but it's all, it's a bit like attitudes towards sustainability. The UK is a bit further ahead than Australia. The US is a bit further behind. In many ways, I sort of think there's something similar going on with kind of the recognition of the power of purpose. But in general, if we'd gone to that same set of investors when we were getting started 10 years ago and said, hey, we want to start a toilet paper company, give away half of our profits. It's called Who Gives a Crap. Can you write us a check? They would have said, hell no, like that is not an investable company. And so we had an amazing response from investors. We did a lot of reverse due diligence before we got started to make sure we were talking to the right people. But the response was really, I think, better than what we could have anticipated. Maybe because we had PTSD from being told that we weren't an investable idea from many years earlier. But it sort of it showed that change from sort of the attitude 10 years ago to when we did the raise. It showed that there is this massive shift in the way that capitalism is unfolding, and there is a huge evolution underway. And so I think what makes me most excited is actually thinking about what that means for the businesses of the future, kind of 10, 20 years from now, that will be able to innovate in ways that we can't imagine today, because capital markets are accepting that this is actually a thing that makes sense, which is kind of cool.
I think also there's a shift in the way consumers respond to products. I think that consumers, and not to paint too broad a stroke, but consumers in general are, I suppose, tilting towards products like Who Gives a Crap, where there is goodness at the end of that purchase, which was never an option before.
I think I sort of feel like the consumer sentiment's a bit different, because I sort of feel like that sentiment was always there, but until 2015, it was very hard to launch new brands and bring them out into the world. And so I feel like there was this latent consumer demand that existed that Who Gives a Crap was able to tap into. Whereas what's happened in capital markets, I don't think there's been a latent ESG investor that whole period. I think that actually, investors have started to realize that purpose is a very powerful part of the capitalist toolkit in a way that they didn't 10 or 20 years ago. That's probably a slightly simplified view of the world. Of course, there has been a lot of latent ESG investors who literally can't find places to put their money. So maybe I'm wrong, but we weren't selling a product that a capital market, a public market investor could invest in. So I probably don't know enough about the public markets to know whether I'm being truthful or misleading.
Okay. Well, a couple of questions just to finish off, Simon. Thank you again for your time. But you're now, I suppose, the head of an organization, and this podcast is about meaningful work. And of course, what you do has a really strong purpose in that there's a clear causal line between what you do and the good it's having in the world. But besides that, how do you ensure that people who work for you have meaningful work?
How do we ensure they have meaningful work?
So just in terms of how you set up your culture, or
Yeah, I mean, I think that starts with getting the right people into the business, which sounds strange when you're talking about an individual having meaningful work, but a big part of meaningful work is the output of the work or the outcome of the work that you're working on, but it's also the people that you work with. And so I really think it's about, making sure that you've got a group of people who are excited to work together to solve a problem together, just as much as it is about making sure that you've got a problem that people really care about and find meaningful. And so the first step is, are we hiring people who have the right set of values that will therefore exhibit the behaviors that we need to see in order to build a workplace where people can do meaningful work together? And then the second part of that is, what is the meaningful work? What are we trying to achieve that's meaningful? And for us, everyone in the company would be able to tell you that our mission is to make sure everyone in the world has access to a toilet and clean water. And so it becomes our job to figure out how we build the right KPIs, the right OKRs, whatever goal-setting framework you're using, so that people understand how the work that they're doing today and this week and this quarter is laddering up to what we're trying to achieve this year, to get to our 5-year vision, to get to our 30-year goal of everyone in the world with access to a toilet. So that's probably how I'd think about it.
And I suppose finally, maybe you've answered it in part, but this podcast is called On Meaningful Work. How would you define that term, on meaningful work?
I don't know if I could define it. It's like, to me, meaningful is such a personal kind of thing that what's meaningful to one person is just entirely different to someone else. And so, yeah, I guess it's kind of doing work that fills your cup up, but everyone's got a cup that gets filled up by something different. So that's probably the most simplistic view of the world, but yeah.
Or maybe
maybe it's doing work that you're excited to get out of bed and jump into. But what that work is will be different for each person.
Sure. Or maybe framed a little differently, what advice would you give someone who comes to you and asks, how do you find meaningful work?
I mean, I think, call me an economist, but I don't think you know what it is until you try it. And so I think you need to take enough shots to have one hit bullseye. And so to me, that means, creating a short list of things that you think might be interesting, and then going and trying them and understanding, taking note of what is good and what's not, what is meaningful and what's not meaningful, and then trying to optimize and iterate and get closer with each iteration to being, in the right meaningful place the next time around. That's kind of how I started my career. It was, I want to go and do 3 months as a summer internship here, 3 months there. Neither of them are right. What's the next thing? Went and did 3 months somewhere else, got me one step closer, and then eventually kind of figured out, well, here's the thing that got me one step closer. How do I kind of turn that bit up and turn the other stuff down? And so, yeah, I don't know, you kind of have to, it's not A/B test, that's more of an on-off test style approach to finding meaningful work.
The lean startup model of designing your career. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, test and learn. Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
But most employers would hate you if you do that. So
so get internships, or
doesn't look good on your CV either. Yeah.
But thank you so much for doing this, Simon. I think it's fair to say that throughout this journey, you someone who's, for me at least, has set the template for what it would mean to be someone who's doing meaningful work. And also, just for your time today, and also when we were starting off, all those years, giving us access to space, and you also spoke at our first meetup. So just for all of that, thanks heaps.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's lovely to hear, and huge fan of kind of the ecosystem and everything that's kind of come out of all of the work that you guys have put into it. So whatever I can do to help with that, happy to do it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you're enjoying and are learning from this podcast, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. A great zero-cost way to support us is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you are feeling extra generous, it'd be great if you could leave a comment or feedback on our Apple Podcast or YouTube pages. Or you could email your comments and feedback to me directly at rahul@disruptivebusinessnetwork.com. That's RAHUL@disruptivebusinessnetwork, all one word, .com. Finally, a big shout out to our producer Dan Scahill for his work on the keys, and to Vashti Civil for writing the original music for our theme. Until next time, this is your host, Rahul Sones, signing off. Bye.